Picture this. You're in a cafe in Tokyo. It's bustling. You leave your phone, your wallet, and your laptop right on the table and go to order. When you come back, of course, everything is exactly where you left it. It's one of the safest countries on Earth. It routinely ranks near the very top of the Global Peace Index. But behind that image of incredible, peaceful order, policymakers in Tokyo are looking at a different set of numbers with a growing sense of panic. They're not looking at crime rates. They're looking at marriage registries. They're looking at birth announcements. And they're seeing what many are now calling a genuine national security crisis. This threat isn't a foreign army. It's not a new weapon. It's the fact that for a whole generation, people have just stopped having kids. And it's dragging the entire country toward a demographic cliff. Okay, so let's unpack this. It's a pretty startling idea, isn't it? We're going to be talking about how a peaceful, prosperous nation's greatest threat is actually internal its own birth rate. And this deep dive is really focused on Japan's accelerating demographic decline as a national security challenge. But I think more importantly, we're going to get into the why, how this crisis is so deeply, inextricably linked to the societal and institutional burdens placed specifically on women.
Exactly. We're moving well beyond just, noting that the population's getting older.
Right.
We have to analyze the profound structural constraints. I mean, everything from military readiness all the way down to workplace dynamics that are fueling this crisis.
And what's really fascinating here is how the conversation inside Japan has changed.
It's a fundamental shift. For decades, demographics, that was seen as a social welfare problem.
Or maybe a long-term economic thing to worry about later.
Especially a headwind. But now, it's being explicitly framed as a hard strategic vulnerability. The core threat is capacity.
Capacity?
Japan's geopolitical demands are rising, but the human capital to meet them, the actual people, is shrinking rapidly. And that just creates this inevitable strategic mismatch.
I want to start right there on the strategic front, because if you look at Japan's geopolitical posture today, they're boosting their defense budget, they're trying to navigate these rising tensions in East Asia, and yet they have fewer and fewer people every year to draw from. Just how deep is this mismatch between their strategy and their resources right now?
Oh, it's becoming critical. I mean, the strategic demands on Japan are immense.
You're talking about being a critical American ally.
A critical ally, maintaining a credible deterrent against increasing assertiveness from China, constant threats from North Korea.
So to do all that, they need robust defense capabilities.
And the economic muscle to sustain them. But here's the sharp mismatch. They have to maintain this active regional security role, take on more international responsibilities, but with a constantly dwindling pool of resources, especially, young working-age people.
So if the population is aging and shrinking, how does that translate into an immediate economic problem? It feels like we're building a kind of vicious cycle here.
We absolutely are. First, the diminishing workforce is going to limit prospects for robust economic growth. It's a simple equation, really.
Fewer people, fewer goods and services.
Right. Even with all the automation in the world, human capital is still the engine of innovation in high-end services. But second, and this is maybe more pressing, a graying society imposes these, potentially overwhelming financial burdens on the state.
Okay, let's put some meat on those bones. What does potentially overwhelming actually look like in, say, budgetary terms?
We're talking about huge compulsory costs that you just can't avoid. Think about the public health insurance system.
Okay.
As the population ages, chronic conditions become more common, and the cost of care just skyrockets. Then you have pensions. These systems rely on a certain number of current workers paying in to support the current retirees.
And that ratio is getting worse and worse.
It's collapsing. As that ratio shifts from, many workers per retiree to maybe 2 to 1 or even less, the whole pension system solvency comes into question.
Which means you either have to hike taxes like crazy on the few workers left, or you have to drastically cut benefits for the elderly.
And either choice is politically toxic. This requires a massive diversion of funds. We're talking trillions of yen away from things like growth-oriented spending.
So the government gets trapped. It needs to spend more on defense and technology to deal with external threats. But the fiscal reality at home forces them to spend more and more just to care for the aging population. That has to limit investment in R&D or infrastructure.
That is the opportunity cost right there. Every single yen spent stabilizing the pension system or building a new elderly care facility is a yen not spent on, say, next-generation fighter jets or investing in future energy security. It's a slow bleed of future potential.
And this challenging fiscal environment, eventually it hits their strategic capabilities directly.
It has to. And if we move from the budget sheet to the boots on the ground, the self-defense forces, the problem gets even more stark. I'm talking about the military manpower problem.
Yeah.
You see it in recent defense policy documents. There's this hope that technology can substitute for people.
The idea that why recruit thousands of young soldiers when a few dozen skilled operators can fly drones?
That's the dream. But the operational reality is that military needs still soak up a ton of manpower, especially for domestic security. And that's where this demographic vulnerability really, really hits home.
So relying purely on advanced tech, all the gee-whiz stuff, it's just not enough for basic domestic stability.
It's completely insufficient. I mean, unmanned systems are great force multipliers, no doubt, but boots on the ground still count, especially in these unpredictable large-scale domestic crises.
And we saw this play out, didn't we?
We did. The reality was brutally demonstrated in Japan's response to the March 2011 tsunami disaster. I mean, that was the starkest, most unforgettable reminder of how much they rely on manpower for just basic national function.
Just how extensive was that reliance? What were the numbers?
The scale of the response was staggering. Tokyo had to call up over 100,000 military personnel.
100,000.
For search, rescue, logistics, stabilization operations, everything. And to put that into context, 100,000 people was about 40% of the entire active duty force at the time.
40%.
It was the largest deployment of troops in Japan's post-war history.
40% of your entire active force just for domestic disaster relief. That really illustrates the absolute minimum required domestic capacity, doesn't it?
It does. And now, put that in the context of an accelerating demographic decline. As the youth population shrinks, how do you maintain that kind of rapid, massive domestic response capability?
Let alone being ready for an external crisis at the same time.
It becomes structurally unsustainable. The recruitment pool is just drying up. They can't effectively manage the aftermath of the next major earthquake or volcano or pandemic while also fulfilling their baseline defense commitments. This isn't a future problem. It's undermining their operational capacity right now.
That really puts the whole security crisis into perspective. It forces Tokyo into these impossible choices. Do you prioritize disaster relief or external defense? Or just keeping the labor force going? Because they're all drawing from the same shrinking pool of young adults. It's a capacity trap.
It is. And that trap is set by not having enough young people entering the workforce. And this is the crucial part, not enough young people having children to replenish the pipeline.
Right.
So if we accept this is a strategic crisis, we have to dive into the social roots of why fewer people are starting families.
Yeah.
And that leads us directly to this baffling data about women's career choices.
Okay, let's pivot there to the source of the problem, because this is where the internal societal dynamics become this central riddle. We have this deep national security crisis rooted in low birth rates. And when you look at the social factors, you hit a truly, truly baffling data point about high-achieving young women.
The famous riddle, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
Japan has actively promoted policies to realize a society where women shine, improve work-life balance.
Right, they've been talking about this for years.
But the global results are, frankly, disappointing.
And that's the real disconnect. Japan ranks 125 out of 146 countries in the 2023 World Economic Forum Gender Gap Report. That's shockingly low. It's the lowest in the entire East Asia and Pacific region.
It's terrible.
But at the same time, Japanese women are entering the labor force at high rates. The female employment rate is up to 73%, which is actually higher than the OECD average. So women are working more.
They are.
But here's the paradox. Japanese females have significantly lower occupational expectations. They just aim lower professionally than males in Japan and females in pretty much every other developed country.
It is a profound disconnect.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the quality of the human capital we're talking about.
Exactly. This happens even though Japanese girls are academically top tier, globally. They score incredibly high in the OECD's PIA and PIAC assessments. PS, the Program for International Student Assessment, it consistently shows Japanese girls excelling in math and science compared to most of their OECD counterparts. They have world-class skills.
But those skills do not translate into high professional ambition.
They don't, and that is the core conflict. Why is this immense human capital students with demonstrable top-tier capabilities, why are they voluntarily suppressing their own potential?
We have to quantify that loss. And we can do that using occupational status data.
Okay, so let's unpack the technical data a bit here to really get the scale of this lost ambition. You use something called IZE scores, the International Socioeconomic Index.
Right, which is a standardized measure of a job status based on education and income. It scales from, say, 17 for low-status labor like a street sweeper, up to 89 for a high-status professional like a medical doctor.
And when you use this tool to contrast the expectations in Japan with, say, the US or the Czech Republic, the difference is just, it's stark.
It's incredibly stark. If you look at Japanese high school girls, their single top choice for a future occupation is general office clerks.
General office clerks, what's the IZI score for that?
It's 43.
43. So that's essentially the secretarial or administrative track, right? In Japan, they call it Ippon Shoku.
That's the one.
What does that job choice imply about their career trajectory?
It implies a conscious ceiling. Ippon Shoku roles are typically non-managerial, they're focused on routine administration, and crucially, they're seen as being protected from the expectation of excessive overtime. It represents a low-risk, low-pay, and very low trajectory path. For 10% of these high-achieving girls to list this as their top expectation, it's an astonishing compromise of their potential.
And that compromise doesn't even stop there. Another shocking statistic from the sources is that 3% of these high school girls who just demonstrated world-class academic potential expect their future occupation to be housewives.
Which scores an IZ of 17, the absolute baseline.
It's not just a compromise. It's an active choice to prioritize domestic life over maximizing their professional contribution.
Now compare that magnitude of compromise to the U.S. American girls aim dramatically higher. Their top 10 expected jobs have an average IC score of 80.
80.
They're choosing specialist medical practitioners, which is an 82, lawyers in 87, and psychologists in 86.
So we're comparing medical doctors and lawyers in the U.S. to administrative clerks and homemakers in Japan.
Despite the fact that the Japanese girls have equivalent or even superior baseline academic skills, the gap is just enormous.
It really is.
The weighted average ICI score for the top 10 jobs chosen by Japanese high school girls is only 57. That's significantly lower than Japanese boys, whose average is 62, and it's catastrophically lower than the U.S. girls' average of 80.
So these young Japanese women are aiming for mid-range administrative jobs, even though they have the intellectual horsepower to be running hospitals or negotiating international treaties.
That's it. It suggests that the choices they themselves are making, even the most academically capable ones, reflect an early anticipation of the institutional constraints they know they're going to face later on.
The system is discouraging ambition before they even get to university.
It is. They see the system and they self-select out of the highly demanding high-status paths. I mean, the contrast between the two main office job tracks is revealing.
Go.
While 10% choose general office clerks, that's the ICI 43 Ippon Shoku, a smaller group aims for office supervisors, which has an II of 62. That's closer to the managerial career track, the Sogo Shoku. The sheer preference for the lower status administrative path suggests a conscious choice against the career track manager role.
Precisely because that manager role comes with mandatory excessive overtime and the complete annihilation of any work-life balance.
You've got it. So if she chooses to pursue a career, she's already picking the lower pay, lower demand option, specifically because she anticipates needing that flexibility for future domestic responsibilities.
How much of this is driven by educational choices made even earlier?
Well, that leads us to the quantitative findings.
Yeah.
We see that a lower proportion of girls plan to go on to university. It's 59% versus 69% for boys in the 2018 PS data.
That's a 10 percentage point gap.
It's a huge gap, and it immediately pulls down the average ICI score for the entire female cohort. This is what we call the endowment effect in action.
Okay, can you break down the endowment effect in simple terms for us here?
Certainly. If you define the pool of people who are aiming for high-status jobs, let's say 80 plus ICI, as those who go to university,
right,
then fewer girls attending university means the overall occupational status potential for the female population is mathematically lowered before they even enter the job market.
So even if every single university-educated girl became a high-powered lawyer, the total group average is still dragged down by the larger proportion who opted out of higher education entirely.
Exactly. And that choice, the decision not to pursue the highest level of education, is often a reflection of those anticipated career breaks or that expected compromise.
And what role do parents play in all this? Does the visible reality of the mother's job feed into this cycle of compromise?
It does, profoundly.
Yeah.
Parental influence is a massive factor, particularly for girls. We see that mothers' occupations have a notably higher influence on Japanese girls compared to boys or to girls in other countries.
So the mother's career path often serves as the most visible, practical, maybe the safest role model.
That's a great way to put it. If the mother has navigated the labor market through non-regular work or made a career compromise. The daughter sees that as the realistic path to security.
For instance?
Well, if mothers have specific qualifications, they often prefer their daughters to pursue certified occupations, things like teaching or nursing.
Because those jobs are seen as stable, and they're easier to return to after a long career break for child rearing.
Precisely. It's a risk-averse, security-first choice that directly limits the pursuit of those high-risk, high-reward, managerial or specialist tracks. The mother's hard-won experience navigating a harsh labor market becomes the daughter's limited ambition. It coats this powerful intergenerational cycle of reduced potential.
So we've established that young women have the talent but are self-selecting into lower professional paths because of these anticipated conflicts. Let's move on and analyze the institutional and cultural constraints, the societal shackles that really confirm these anxieties and make high ambition almost impossible to maintain alongside family life.
Okay, so we have to look at the institutionalized gender division. This is the system that fundamentally traps women in these low-trajectory careers. This duality in the labor market really emerged during Japan's rapid economic growth, and it effectively split the economy into two tracks.
You're talking about the regular and non-regular employment tracks. Can you fully define those two paths for us and explain why that regular path is so hostile to women?
Of course. The labor market is severely bifurcated. On one side, you have the regular track. This is characterized by lifelong employment, seniority-based wages, significant social benefits, and generalist roles.
This is the path to management and high income.
It is. And it is historically, structurally, and just overwhelmingly male-dominated. Then on the other side, you have the non-regular track. Part-time, lower pay, transient, with minimal benefits, and this track is predominantly female.
So if the regular track is the path to stability and high earnings, why don't more women pursue it aggressively?
Because that track is built on an outdated model, the expectation of unlimited dedication to the company. Regular employees, who are overwhelmingly men, face the longest paid work hours among developed countries. We're talking about an average of 7 hours and 32 minutes per day. And that doesn't include long commutes or, all the unpaid overtime.
Right, that culture of excessive overtime karoshi culture essentially is rooted in the idea that the male employee is the sole breadwinner, and he's completely unburdened by any domestic duties.
Precisely. The system demands that the regular employee dedicate their unlimited time and loyalty to the company. This culture is just fundamentally incompatible with a shared family life or any child-rearing responsibilities.
So when women marry or have children, they're disproportionately pushed out of that regular track because the system just won't accommodate any need for flexibility.
That's right. And we know the consequence of that exit, the career compromise when they try to re-enter the workforce later.
That's a huge barrier, isn't it?
Massive. Companies on that regular track, they prefer hiring fresh graduates for those core lifelong positions. They're not looking for women re-entering after a 5 or 10-year career break.
So those women find their only option as the non-regular track.
Often, yes. Part-time, low-paying jobs that offer minimal career advancement. This structural rigidity ensures that even as female employment rises overall, that 73% statistic we mentioned, it's often concentrated in precarious, lower-paying work, which just perpetuates the gender disparity.
It sounds like the entire Japanese labor market is designed to reward the male breadwinner model and actively penalize a dual-income family.
I think that's an accurate assessment. And this institutional reality is reinforced by a cultural anchor, what's called the status dependency model.
Okay.
We saw earlier that in countries like the US, a woman's identity and her social status are increasingly tied to her own individual occupational achievement. In Japan, that link is much, much weaker.
So Japanese women often still associate their social standing more with their husband's status, his income, his educational level.
Yes. So let's take that to a concrete example. Say we have a Japanese woman who, despite her amazing PISA scores, chose that general office clerk track with an ISI of 43. But she marries a high-earning, high-status corporate manager. Her social status is actually seen as higher than, say, a female lawyer with an ICI of 87 who marries a low-status earner.
Wow. That's the social dynamic at play, and it reinforces this traditional view.
And the data shows this view is persistent, even if it is slowly changing. While fewer women favor stopping work entirely after having kids, that's down from 43% in 1992 to 20% in 2019. A significant portion still holds a very positive view of being a housewife.
Right.
Japan ranks second highest, only after Korea, in agreement with the statement that being a housewife is fulfilling compared to being a working woman.
So even if the reality is they have to work for financial reasons, the cultural ideal of the dedicated homemaker is still powerful. Marrying well offers a kind of social security blanket, which is a powerful disincentive for women to endure that punishing regular career track.
And this cultural ideal is maintained and enabled by perhaps the most glaring behavioral constraint of all, what I'd call the male unpaid work crisis. This is the practical bottleneck that prevents the dual income model from ever really functioning.
I want to spend some time on this statistic because it is just staggering. What is the figure for male unpaid work in Japan?
Japanese men spend the least amount of time on unpaid work, household chores, childcare, caring for elderly parents among all developed countries. They clock in at a mere 41 minutes per day.
41 minutes. That is less time than many people spend on their commute. What does that one number tell us about the cultural resistance to shared responsibility?
It tells us the male breadwinner model is alive and well, regardless of any policy changes on paper. When a woman is working full-time or trying to advance her career, and the man only contributes 41 minutes of unpaid labor, the dual burden falls almost entirely on her shoulders.
She has to manage the demanding job in the home.
And it's an impossible task. This unequal division acts as a major insurmountable constraint on her career advancement, forcing her back to the flexible, lower-status ippen shoku, or non-regular employment track, as soon as family duties arise.
But if the government has introduced things like parental leave policies, why aren't men using them? Is this purely a cultural thing, or is the rigid, overtime-based employment system actively penalizing men who try to take time off?
It's a combination of both, but the system actively discourages it. The organizational culture is often one of implicit threat.
How so?
Taking significant parental leave can be seen as a sign of disloyalty to the company. It can lead to you being sidelined or passed over for promotion. The company needs that dedicated generalist worker available at all times.
So a man who contributes to that 41-minute statistic is a man who is actively demonstrating he prioritizes the company over his domestic life.
And the system rewards him for it. It's a self-reinforcing system. It's not just about individual choice. It's a systemic design flaw.
And the data backs this up.
The multi-level analysis confirms it beyond a doubt. Even when researchers control for individual factors like how high a girl aims academically or her parental background, the country-level factors account for about 31.5% of the total variability in the low occupational expectations of Japanese girls relative to boys.
Nearly a third of the explanation is rooted purely in the societal environment. Which specific country-level factors are driving that 31.5%?
It's a mix. It's the highly visible gender wage gap, the extremely low proportion of female managers, so a lack of role models, that short male unpaid work time, the 41 minutes, and the continuing positive societal views on the status of housewives.
I see.
These factors collectively create an environment that actively penalizes ambitious women, and it renders their high academic achievements economically fragile.
Which means that if we want to solve the demographic and security crisis, individual efforts like encouraging girls to pursue STEM are necessary, but they're entirely insufficient if the institutional environment just penalizes those women the moment they start a family.
Precisely. The structural factors must fundamentally change to enable women to fully utilize their high human capital. The solution to the national security problem, ultimately, lies in fixing the equity problem.
And that brings us to the policy prescription. The sources provide a fascinating comparative analysis with the UK, which had similar challenges but seems to have implemented work-life balance policies much more successfully. Where did Japan's policies go so wrong?
It's a really illuminating comparison because, as we noted, Japan was an early mover on this. It introduced its parental leave law way back in 1992, 4 years before the UK. So on paper, they looked like pioneers.
Right.
But policy adoption is pretty meaningless without the cultural and systemic implementation to back it up.
So Japan had the policy in place early, but its application was narrow and, well, culturally toxic.
That's a good way to put it. In Japan, flexible work systems, things like flex time or reduced hours, are practically limited only to mothers of young children or people caring for the elderly. It's treated as an unwelcome exception.
Almost like a sick bay policy. You only use it when you have a necessary medical or domestic reason.
Exactly. And if you use that sick bay policy, you are immediately identified as less committed to the company, which of course harms your career trajectory.
And the utilization rates are low.
Very low. And crucially, when women do use flexible work, it almost always means reduced hours and subsequent pay cuts. This immediately penalizes their career momentum, their earnings, their future pension contributions, and it just reinforces the decision to aim for lower status jobs in the first place.
Now, contrast that with the UK model. It seems to treat flexible work as more of a universal design principle.
That is the essential difference. The UK system offers a much wider menu of flexible options. Telework, flex-to-time, compressed hours, and eligibility was expanded to all employees, regardless of their parental or carer status.
So it's seen less as an accommodation for mothers and more as just a normal modern work style.
Based on productivity per hour and outcome-oriented management. Yes. So in the UK, a male manager might use flex-a-time to coach a soccer team or pursue further education, not just to pick up a child from school. It becomes a normalized, non-stigmatized tool.
So utilization is much higher.
Significantly higher. Over a third of employees were actively using flexible work options even before the pandemic accelerated the trend. And crucially, in the UK, flexible work is adopted by both women and men across managerial and professional roles, which means it doesn't signal career suicide.
The qualitative insights from the student interviews and the source material really drive home this difference, don't they, between a functional system and a purely nominal one?
Well, they really do. They confirm this psychological impact. The Japanese interviewees expressed this profound anxiety about career disruption, inflexibility, potential discrimination if they had children.
And a lack of role models.
A complete lack. They saw very few visible high-status female role models who had successfully balanced a career and a family without making massive professional compromises. This lack of visible success just reinforces their risk-averse choice of lower-status professions.
Whereas the UK students, they saw a viable path forward.
They are significantly less worried. They could often point to women in senior roles, lab leaders in academia, successful doctors, managing partners in law firms who also had children.
Right.
So those pursuing STEM in the UK often felt they were not disadvantaged, unlike their Japanese counterparts, where fewer high-scoring girls pursue STEM because the necessary time commitment is seen as impossible to maintain once family demands arrive. The existence of high-status role models just normalizes ambition.
So the path forward has to be a set of fundamental reforms that tackle both the labor market structure and that outdated social security system at the same time. You have to create a truly level playing field.
It's imperative. And the government has to implement simultaneous reforms in three major areas. The first is profound labor system reform. Japan must dismantle the seniority-based generalist membership type model, which is characterized by that mandatory excessive overtime and the expectation of lifelong loyalty above all else.
But how do you transition an entire corporate culture away from valuing time spent in the office to valuing actual output?
It requires a major shift to what's called a job type model, one based on productivity per hour, on specific skill sets, and on outcome-oriented management. Employees need greater autonomy over their working hours and locations, and companies must be required to define the scope of work and reward efficiency, not just presence.
That would instantly make the high-status career track more compatible with family life for both men and women.
It would. Then the second area you mentioned is the Social Security and tax systems, which actively reward the outdated male breadwinner model. What specifically needs to be fixed there?
This has to be a massive area of resistance, right? The current system provides these powerful financial disincentives for women to work full-time.
It really does.
Yeah.
The whole system is based on the assumption of a single male breadwinner and a dependent wife. It must be replaced with a dual income model. Right now, the structure includes a massive dependent spouse tax deduction. The male earner gets a big tax break if his wife earns below certain thresholds.
You're referring to the notorious walls that prevent women from earning more.
Exactly. There are several of these walls, depending on the benefits, like the 1.03 million yen wall, the 1.3 million yen wall, and so on. If a part-time female worker earns just 1 yen over these thresholds, she can lose her tax break status or, critically, have to start paying her own Social Security contributions.
Which can result in her net disposable income actually decreasing even though she worked more hours.
It's a direct, perverse incentive to stay in low-paying part-time work. It reinforces the non-regular track, and it suppresses ambition.
So, structurally, what's the fix?
To fix it, policymakers must require pension contributions from unemployed dependent spouses, which is a common practice in most developed countries, and align the tax system to stop providing massive subsidies to the single earner model. This would eliminate that financial incentive for women to limit their working hours.
And finally, the cultural and educational systems have to address the roots of the problem in the younger generation.
Yes, Education and culture need immediate attention. Gender stereotypes have to be eliminated early, starting in kindergarten, reinforcing the message that women are equally capable and valued in fields like STEM. And on top of that, schools must strengthen life and financial planning education for both sexes,
Why is the financial education piece so key here?
because it addresses the reality of the 21st century. I mean, both girls and boys need to be told explicitly about the high costs of living, the increasing expense of child rearing, and the simple financial necessity of two full-time, high-earning incomes for a comfortable lifestyle.
So it directly counteracts the cultural ideal of the stay-at-home spouse by framing the dual income path as the only financially realistic and sustainable option.
Exactly. The message needs to be explicitly communicated by policymakers. The traditional male breadwinner part-time wife model is no longer financially viable for comfort, nor is it fiscally sustainable for the country. The dual income imperative is the only path forward.
The demographic crisis really is the ultimate proof that maintaining these institutionalized gender divisions is actively undermining the long-term national interest and national security.
It is. The solution to the security problem is not just more tanks or more drones, it's enabling every highly skilled woman to achieve her highest professional potential, because the nation simply cannot afford the compromise anymore.
And that brings us to our final thought. We've really, I think, thoroughly analyzed how this demographic clock ticking in Tokyo isn't just an economic issue. It's a full-blown national security vulnerability rooted deeply in these institutionalized gender roles and outdated labor and tax practices.
We have this pool of globally top-tier human capital in Japanese women, and maximizing that capital requires tearing down these systemic constraints.
It seems so clear.
If the structural shackles preventing women from achieving their highest professional potential are removed, not only does it fix a profound equity issue, but it directly addresses the country's most critical existential threat: its capacity to maintain economic stability, defense readiness, and social services.
Yeah.
The fate of the nation really does hinge on the future ambition of its daughters.
And this isn't just the story about Japan. It's a powerful global illustration that in the 21st century, national strength and stability hinge less on raw military might and far more on a society's willingness to grant every single individual, regardless of gender, the full economic and professional opportunity to thrive. Because the survival of the nation depends on utilizing all of its human potential.